but after this, luckily, you won't have to for some time. Anyway, it's very difficult to try to conclude or wrap up an event like this. Luckily, Mrs. Huck has made my job much easier because she's looked at the concrete steps that we hope to undertake at Beaconhouse. But I just wanted to, put my 2 cents into this also. It's been obviously a very, very exciting 2 days for us, and a number of you, I'm sure you know who you are, have come up to me and said what a wonderful experience you've had over the last 2 days. And I think some of you may remember that my response to almost every person who said that to me is that it's all very well to have a great conference, but what are we going to do after that? Because I'm all too familiar with the situation, or with situations where one attends very interesting or fun events or conferences, and then you go back to your workplace and you feel a little bit motivated for a couple of days, and then you sort of slide back into whatever it is that you were doing earlier. So we are very keen for that not to happen, and I realize that in order for that not to happen, we will have to provide an enabling environment at your schools. The one thing that we've learned over the last many years, and hopefully Mrs. Huck will agree with this, is that each time we've introduced a new initiative, it's been met with varying levels of success. And the ones which have been truly successful have been the ones which have had the highest level of, let's say, buy-in from all levels, starting from the head of the school to, the rest of the school leadership, teachers, everyone. So we do hope to try to get everybody on board. One of the ways that we hope to do that is that we'd like to try to set up a number of working groups after this conference. Luckily, we know which workshops you all registered for because thanks to our IT department, the registrations for all the workshops were online. So we'd like to ask for some of you to volunteer. We'll be getting in touch with you later to perhaps join these working groups so that we can continue to discuss and debate the issues that were raised during the workshops and during the conference. So basically, this is one thing which is extremely, extremely important. We also, the other feedback that I've received from a number of people is that these events are great, but to have a conference like this once every 5 years is probably not the best way to make progress. So I have been discussing with Mrs. Huck and of course with Mrs. Kasuri and the senior management of Beaconhouse. And we are very keen to organize more frequent events, but they'll probably be smaller. So I think that it may be beneficial in the long run to have, smaller and more frequent events rather than to have giant events like this every 5 years. So I hope you'll agree with that. Also, of course, we'd like to not just organize these events in Lahore. I would like us to look at Karachi, Islamabad, and indeed for the international division, Dubai, Kuala Lumpur. I have spoken to Tina Blackaby, who's our regional director in the Middle East. We were chatting a little bit earlier about organizing a forum over there. Mrs. Sadiq, the regional director in Southeast Asia, and I have been talking for ages about doing a conference over there. So I think that we now need to embrace the reality that we are no longer just a Pakistan-based organization. Yes, the roots of Beaconhouse will always be in Pakistan, but it is an organization that aspires to be more global and is rapidly moving in that direction. I want to touch upon some of the key questions that the conference was meant to, well, I won't say answer, but that we were supposed to deliberate upon. And I touched upon some of those questions in my opening, the opening panel discussion, which I had yesterday morning. Now, I'm not going to pretend that we've, conclusively answered every question that we raised, But I think that we're a little bit closer. So I've jotted down, 3 or 4 of the key questions over here. The first question was, do schools stifle creativity? Now, I think that after listening to a lot of the speakers, the panel discussions, the comments that our keynote speaker had to make, and of course the comments that people on my own panel, had to say, probably the best way to summarize it would be in the words of Professor Hawley, which is that they can, but they don't have to. So let's try to remember that, the little things that we do and the little actions that we, what do you do with an action? You make an action, do an action in the classroom. With all of those little things and with all the little glints that we meet in our classrooms, let's remember that, creativity is something that needs to be nurtured, and we have to celebrate, kids who are different as opposed to expecting everyone to fit in the same mold. The other question that we had raised was, should students decide what to learn and how to learn? Now, again, if I sort of dropped in on a number of the workshops, very rudely interrupted, I'm sure, and it must have been perceived by the workshop leaders. And I think that a lot of people seem to feel that, yes, students should, to some degree, have that autonomy to decide what it is that they want to learn and how they want to learn it. And I think that the keynote speaker, along with perhaps Claude Alvarez, Aisha Kasuri, who spoke about project-based learning, and a lot of other people do feel that this is something ideally which we should strive towards, but needless to say, and in the, as Mrs. Huck said earlier, it requires much more than just inspiration. We can want to do something, but, the reality is that there are a number of other targets and objectives that we also need to achieve. So, yes, ideally students should have some direction over their own learning, but we need to create an environment in which other objectives are also achieved. Does technology enhance learning? I think according to Richard Petrashik, Norbert Batchelor, Aslam Sharif, and probably a lot of other people, technology probably does enhance learning. So I think you'll hopefully agree that to some extent that was a somewhat rhetorical question. Does teacher education bring permanent change to classroom practice? Now, that's a very tricky one. Even though, as I mentioned yesterday, 88% of the respondents to our online questionnaire believed that yes, teacher training does bring permanent change to classroom practice. But I think that one thing that we need to perhaps do is, or consider, is to look at various models of teacher training and not just the traditional teacher training that perhaps we're all used to or that the government keeps, referring to all the time. Again, I refer over here to Mrs. Huck's comment about school-based professional development. Andy Goodwin also spoke about the McKinsey report. Now, Mrs. Huck and I have, looked at that report, and one of the things that it mentions is that teacher training is only successful in the long run if it is complemented or supplemented by school-based coaching, constant coaching and mentoring. Because otherwise it's very easy to attend a fabulous course in the way that, I hope we attended this great conference, and then to go back to school and, gradually slide back into the older way of doing things. So there are a lot of interesting models that have been discussed, including the one, introduced by Professor Hawley. So I think that we need to look at teacher training in a slightly, or professional development, I should say, in a slightly non-conventional manner. Do children learn through play? Well, according to Kathy Wilson, Susan and David, Thomas White, Martha Lash, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouths, Richard Gerber, I think children do learn through play. And I hope that the audience over here will agree with that. So these are some directions that we've gotten over the last couple of days, by no means conclusive answers. And we will continue to deliberate these issues in these working groups that I spoke of, because even though these are some of the, sort of broader questions, but they're all directly linked to the 22 workshops that were conducted and to the 4 areas which Mrs. Huck spoke of, namely educational leadership, professional development, early years education, and the primary curriculum / exciting ways of teaching and learning. So you'll be disappointed to hear that I only covered 1 page. I just have a few other notes. So I still stand between you and your high tea. There are a couple of other things which I wanted to mention, which are, I suppose, useful. I do want to thank all the speakers who have come here, the 22, 23 speakers who have come from across the world, some in their individual capacities and others as representatives of universities. And those of you who are representatives of universities already know that we're talking to you about the possibility of some sort of collaboration with your institutions. So I hope that we will continue to work with you. And of course, those of you who came here in your individual capacities, we're very excited about the stuff that you had to say. And we hope also to collaborate with you in the future. So thank you for joining us in Pakistan. Thank you very much. And for making this a truly special event for us. Because otherwise you would just have had Mrs. Huck and I to, listen to, and that wouldn't have been very exciting. I'm sorry, Mrs. Huck. I also want to apologize to some of you for the discomfort that you had to face during the Prime Minister's visit yesterday, but as you know, unfortunately, that's how, these things are. We were all very uncomfortable while we were waiting outside. Somebody also lost an iPad, which is, most unfortunate. But I think that his joining us ultimately was beneficial, even if it did turn into a bit of a political event at the end. I want to also say a couple of words about the teachers' panel discussion that we had at the end. It was personally very exciting and gratifying for me to hear what you all had to say. Zara, Asim Ali, well, both the Asims, Asim Ali and Asim Yaqub, and Canwell, even I have Kawal Wajid. I'm just kidding. I think you guys are absolutely great, and I agree with everything that you had to say. And I want to assure our teachers who are present in this hall right now, and those who are not, which is obviously most of them, because we have, I think, 7,000 teachers just in Pakistan, that we are always thinking of you. And I know that sometimes that's hard to believe for a number of reasons that you know of. But you have